Hey everyone, hopefully everyone's having a fine day today. So today we'll be going into the prototyping stage of the design cycle. In the last video we covered the ideation stage, which when I went into it, we covered a lot of the pros and cons of it, how one can really use it to the best of their abilities, some real life experiences of what I've done with ideating, and also just some examples of it, such as sketching, mind maps, etc. How you could one could ideate. In this video, we'll be going over prototyping. Both stages are interlinked. Remember, they're not linear, so don't be afraid to go back to either of these stages later on in the design cycle. So, prototyping is often defined as an experimental process where one implements ideas into tangible forms from paper or digital forms. So, you're taking something that you've drawn physically on paper, sketched out on paper, or you've created online, and you're really taking that and creating something physical out of it. So usually by the end of the ideation process, you have a good rough idea of either one or two ideas you've created or thought of that you'll be using in this prototyping stage. So often when you start physically trying to make these ideas and trying to make them into physical forms, you have to kind of test these ideas quickly. So prototyping is really good because it often allows you to fail many times, which is totally okay, but it gets it done quickly. Right? So you can quickly make something, realize it will work, and then just kind of go on to your next idea. So often what you want to do in this stage of prototyping is you would want to create a physical product of some sort, and you want to record, observe, or measure the performances of the prototypes. So once you've made your prototype, you want to make sure you actually write down, write notes, whatever you want, voice recordings of how it went, what you could change, and what didn't work. And what this allows you to do is go into the next stage of testing with a better kind of eye for what you would want. So there's two ways you can kind of make prototypes. They kind of go into two categories of low fidelity or high fidelity. So low fidelity usually is the process of you making something very rough. So for my example in the past, I made a laptop table, and an example with that would be I made a model of it using cardboard. Now cardboard is a very manipulative tool. It's a great material to use when making a really quick, rough prototype because it's very easily manipulatable. So it's cheap also. So that was what I used in the past. But the other category is also high fidelity. So if I wanted to make a laptop table and the final material of it would be plastic, I would actually go out and make a prototype of it in plastic to kind of get a more high-end result, something that might be closer to my final product. So in the low fidelity, you kind of are working on the core elements of your prototype, not really looking for it to be or resemble your final product, versus high fidelity kind of goes closer to the end of your product. Now high fidelity does, when you're working with materials that are closer to your end material, it doesn't allow you to manipulate it or alter it very quickly, versus with low fidelity you can, because you're often using things like cardboard or paper, right? So those are kind of the basics of prototyping, and in the next slide I'll be going into just how one could prototype in real life. So looking at how people could, use prototyping in a real life situation, often people, majority of the time, it's by creating rough objects. Like I mentioned before, low fidelity, you could use some things like paper, cardboard, construction paper, things like that, quite cheap and easy to alter. Or you could go on the higher end and use more expensive materials closer to what you want. So the process is essentially that, of making rough objects as fast as you can, and then just testing them out, recording all that, recording how it went, pros and cons of it, and what you might want to change. The second point there is quick building. The big thing with prototyping is how quickly you can throw different ideas out there and kind of see what works and what doesn't work, without just mentally thinking about them. You actually get to try them out. So you always want to make sure with prototyping you're not taking too long on one idea. You want to quickly get something out, see if it works, and if it does, maybe build upon it or try it in a different way. So quick building is totally one thing you want to make sure you do. And also, just the really thing with prototyping is you want to role play to understand if it fits your solution at the end of the day. If you're building a laptop table like I did, what you want to do is actually try it out with a laptop, right? So put it up, build it together, and then put a laptop on it. Maybe work on the laptop for an hour or so, right? Try it out, see if it actually holds up. Is it comfortable? Does it need to be lower? Does it need higher? Is it stable enough? A lot of little things. So try it out as if it was your actual final product, right? So just those 3 things are just great ways to kind of utilize in real life prototyping stages. In the next slide, I'll be going into just what I've done with prototyping in the past, and just going into my laptop table that I've mentioned a few times here. So going off the last slide, a couple more ways that I've seen other people prototype is with 3D printing models. So say if you need to make a little gadget or something, often what you may be able to do if you have access to a 3D printer is print off a little model of your gadget. Or if you want to print off little parts separately and then put them together afterwards after printing, that's also a great way to achieve prototyping without using just simple cardboard and paper. PLA material or filament for 3D printing is quite cheap, I'd say. And also 3D printers more and more are becoming cheaper. So a great way to prototype for those that might be into the more on the computer end of prototyping and not really great with their hands. What also I've seen other people do is altering older objects and improving them. So if say if your final product is a chair, someone what they could do is grab an old chair that may be broken or in disrepair, or that may not be the exact same chair they want in their own solution for their product, and then adding to it. So already having a base to go off of and just adding to it and just making it work for them. So just a couple more ways of how you could achieve prototyping without just the usual paper, cardboard making models. So here is the prototype I've done in the past for my laptop table. So in the previous video, I've showed you kind of what my sketches were, my ideation process was for this laptop table. And here I actually ended up making a prototype for it. Now with COVID at the time, we weren't able to make multiple ideations or multiple versions of the prototypes. So I was kind of left with just one, which is totally cool because I think it ended up working pretty well for my case. So as you can see, it's made of all cardboard. The way I actually made it was very similar to how I would have done it if the material was wood. So I actually wanted to make sure if the process itself were very similar and if there were any bumps in the road on how to create it. I did find that the cardboard was pretty stable. You could easily throw a laptop on top of this, which I actually did for actually many assignments. But this is kind of just an example of a low fidelity model of it where you're just throwing something together. I did use a bit of a high fidelity factor of me using the same process I would if it was a real version of the product rather than just using an X-Acto knife. But that's kind of the thing. I think I threw this together in a matter of 2 days perhaps. And often I found, which the great thing with prototyping was there's so many things I found wrong with my design from ideating, which is totally fine. I went back to the drawing board, made some alterations, and that's the big thing with prototyping. You can kind of quickly adjust and make changes and just go back to them. So it was a very valuable lesson, and I think it might be one of the most crucial stages I find in the design cycle. So that's what I've done in the past, and in the next video I'll go show over what the actual laptop table turned into, which was actually quite similar to what you're seeing here on the slideshow right now.